Imagine the media buzzing. Bowie, a man in a dress. Such a thing seems fringe today, more than 55 years later, but back in 1970, it was virtually unheard of, outside the artsy corners of Chelsea and Warhol's factory. 1970 was a pivotal year for David Bowie. Fresh off the success of Space Oddity, he was pressing forward into darker, more ambitious territory. Bowie and producer Tony Visconti began sketching the shape of an album that would push beyond singles, something that would try to be art as an album rather than just pop music. But as mid-1970 barreled forward, Bowie settled into a Haddon Hall flat in Beckenham in what was described visually as Dracula's living room, and it was here where the album and its artwork found its roots. He initially called this work Metrobolist, a nod to Metropolis, the Fritz Lang film from 1927, and the original master tapes bore that name. Now, more on that in a moment. Bowie had already flirted with visual theatrics, wearing flamboyant, superhero-like costumes during a stint where he fronted a familiar-looking band called Hype. Familiar in that it also featured Tony Visconti and Mick Ronson. In a life filled with grand theatrics, what came after Hype would be among the most truly provocative visual statements of Bowie's career. It was an early marker of the theatrical gender play that would define a handful of his personas throughout the decades. And with it came controversy. Hi, I'm Andy Fenstermaker, host of Poetic Wax, a weekly music history series where I dig into the record collection I've been building since the 1990s to explore the history of a band, album, or song from within. And today, we're going to shed light into the corners of darkness within Metrobolist, also known as The Man Who Sold the World. How David Bowie pushed the boundaries of his label's comfort zone, how the album got its new name, and most importantly, we'll look at the stories behind the four album covers that shaped its history. Like the name of the album, the cover also shifted. For the 1970 US release, Bowie had asked his friend, cartoonist Michael J. Weller, to come up with something that captured the record's brooding atmosphere and their shared connection to an imposing Victorian building would serve as the backdrop. Weller and Bowie both had a personal connection to the Cane Hill Asylum, a London psychiatric hospital established in 1882. Weller's friend was a patient, while Bowie's own half-brother had checked himself into the institution. In the year 2000, Bowie would comment on the artwork, stating, quote, Weller devised this kind of very subversive-looking cartoon and put in some quite personalized things. The building in the background on the cartoon is in fact the hospital where my half-brother had committed himself to. So for me, it had a lot of personal resonance about it. End quote. In fact, many songs on the album have a centralized theme of insanity, most notably All the Madmen, the theme of which centers on, quote, a world so bereft of reason that the last sane men are the ones in the asylums. Bowie has noted All the Madmen was written about his half-brother Terry Burns. Terry suffered from schizophrenia and was interned at Cane Hill, and the song touches on themes of institutionalization, lobotomy, tranquilizers, and the madness that society isolates. Herein lies the connection to Weller's artwork. The finished image showed a cowboy in front of Cane Hill's foreboding main entrance, its clock tower cracked and damaged. The cowboy figure itself was based on a photograph of John Wayne, complete with a 10-gallon hat and a rifle, meant as a sly nod to Bowie's apocalyptic B-side opener, Running Gun Blues. At Bowie's suggestion, Weller added a signature exploding head element to the hat, a motif Bowie had used back in his arts lab days. A speech balloon dangled near the cowboy's mouth, with the line, roll up your sleeves and show us your arms. This last part was Bowie's idea, a layered pun on drug use, weaponry, and record players, but Mercury thought it was a little too much, and the bubble was left empty. Initially, Bowie was pleased with Weller's finished piece, but he soured on it quickly. And that brings us to the second cover art, and with it, the aforementioned controversy. Bowie next turned to Keith McMillan, better known as Keef, for something that would feel less gimmicky and more in line with his evolving persona. The resulting photo shoot, held in the living room of Bowie's Haddon Hall flat, produced one of the most striking images of Bowie's career. Here he is, stretched across a chaise lounge, in a satin man's dress, designed by Michael Fish and inspired by pre-Raphaelite painter Dante Gabriel Rossetti. It was flamboyant, androgynous, and unmistakably provocative. Mercury Records, however, wasn't having it. In the US, they stuck with Weller's cartoon cowboy, much to Bowie's frustration. Further exacerbating things, they changed the album's name from Bowie's desired Metrobolist to The Man Who Sold the World, at the last minute, without even consulting Bowie. But in the UK, after some lobbying, the dress cover went on as intended. Bowie would be quite blunt. In 1972, he called the Weller artwork horrible, though by 1999 he had softened, admitting he thought the cartoon, quote, really cool in retrospect. At the time, though, Bowie doubled down on the Keith photograph, wearing the Michael Fish dress on his 1971 US promo tour, even though American audience had never even seen the UK sleeve. He even wore it to his first Rolling Stone interview in 1971 to promote the album, stating, quote, I refuse to be thought of as mediocre. If I am mediocre, I'll get out of the business. There's enough fog around. That's why the idea of performance as a spectacle is so important to me. End quote. Those were words he would live by for decades. The controversy of the Keith album cover extended beyond the attire to what it implied, a deliberate destabilizing of gender roles and a statement that fashioned identity as performance. Tiffany Naiman, who studies Bowie's intertextual imagination, noted in an interview with KCRW that when the image first circulated, the record label argued the visual tone, quote, did the opposite of what the sound of the music was. Instead, it risked distracting or misleading the listener. His cross-dressing was an intentional part of an aesthetic and a conceptual push towards fluid identity, but the risk extended beyond being misleading to the listener. The risk was literal. He once recounted that on a US tour in Texas, obviously, someone pulled a gun on him and called him a fag. Yet he reflected, but I thought the dress looked beautiful. Parallel to the American cartoon and British dress covers, Germany received its own distinctive version of The Man Who Sold the World in 1971. This one sits in between styles, eerie, surreal, allegorical. The German cover, as it's known, featured a winged hybrid creature, Bowie's head attached to a hand body, poised as if to flick the earth away. This version was designed by Whit Hamburg for Mercury's German branch. It's sometimes called the German cover, or the round cover, or fold-out round cover in collector's circles. The LP sleeve unfolded into two wide circular panels showing this image or variations thereof. Why this odd imagery? Well, it captures something of the psychocosmic mood of the record, displacement, mutation, an unsettling sense of identity and scale. There's Bowie's head, a hand for a body, interacting with a tiny globe. It's these large wings. It's symbolic, a visual shorthand for the alienation Bowie was exploring, being human but other, touching but separate from the world. It's rarer, more abstract, and far less immediately commercial than the others. Collectors note the German version is among the rarest of the Mercury original sleeves because its run was so limited, and because the design is so different, it was less often preserved in subsequent reissues. Indeed, early pressings fetch a pretty penny. I looked it up. An original 1971 German pressing in fair condition fetches well over $1,000 US. And for you non-record collectors out there, fair is one step above poor and one step below good. And honestly, good isn't good either. Hint, it's not pretty. My copy is a 2016 Record Store Day picture disc. After several iterations of The Man Who Sold the World's artwork, in 1972, Bowie and his label took a decisive turn with a new worldwide reissue under RCA Records. This new cover abandoned both the Weller cartoon and the Macmillan dress. not to mention the German version, in favor of something more aggressive and more in transition. It seemed to better fit the music itself. It's often referred to informally as the kick cover or the action pose cover. Personally, I kind of like the Proto Ziggy reference. Why? Well, in this image, Bowie is captured in black and white mid-action. Guitar in hand, left leg raised, a stance that looks ready to lunge. It embodies more motion, more performance, more rock and roll fierceness than any prior cover had. The pose was inspired by Bowie's friend, Freddie Buretti, who had posed in a similar fashion for a brochure in July of 1972. This cover signaled Bowie's steady move toward a glam rock identity. He still wasn't Ziggy, hence Proto Ziggy, but he was definitely heading in that direction. Bowie's look here, hair, stance, attitude, is a bridge between his earlier folk rock, psychedelic leanings and the more theatrical, otherworldly costumes and personas that would dominate Ziggy Stardust and his subsequent albums through the 1970s. Once RCA rolled out this globally, this kick photograph became the standard cover art for The Man Who Sold the World, across reissues from 1972 until, about 1990 when Rykodisc restored the dress cover for later pressings. More on that in a moment, but first, let's take a look inside the album itself. So, beneath the varied album covers was quite ambitious music. Bowie and Visconti had moved intentionally away from hit singles like Space Oddity in favor of constructing a cohesive work. Visconti reflected on this in Dylan Jones's book David Bowie, A Life. Quote, "On the Space Oddity album, we had no idea what we were doing. So, with The Man Who Sold the World, we tried something different, something harder. We wanted to be seen as a work of art rather than just a pop album." End quote. Alongside Bowie, Visconti, and Ronson, drummer Woody Woodmansey rounded out what would become the backbone of Bowie's early 70s era. They would jam, build songs organically, and let Bowie choose or discard ideas. For example, She Shook Me Cold, Bowie alone is credited, though Visconti would chime in on the collective, stating, quote, "The songs were written by all four of us. We jam, and Bowie would just say whether he liked them or not." Lyrically and thematically, The Man Who Sold the World is dense and haunting. It's full of fractured identity, of doubled selves. You get some of that in the artwork, from the proto-Ziggy kick to the gender-bending attire in Bowie's man dress. In the title track, the narrator confronts someone he once sold the world to. In a later BBC interview, Bowie said, quote, "I guess I wrote it because there was a part of myself that I was looking for. That song, for me, always exemplified kind of how you feel when you're young, when you know there's a piece of yourself that you haven't really put together yet. You have this great searching, this great need to find out who you really are." End quote. Musically, the record fizzes with surprises. The Width of a Circle stretches over 8 minutes, shifting from hard-rocking passages to cosmic, swirling instrumental interludes. The album's commitment to heaviness, mood shifts, and haunting atmospheres marked it as one of Bowie's most sonically daring works. But, honestly, he was pretty early in his career at that point, too. So that's not surprising. Yet commercially, it didn't break massively at first. There was no lead single to propel it. In fact, no song was released as a single at all, though some appeared as B-sides through the early 70s. The dress cover UK edition, controversial as it was, did not guarantee chart dominance. Critics and fans would later look back on it as a pivotal point, but at the time it was more a widespread transition than a loud arrival. In more recent decades, subsequent reissues would find a resurgence of the winged German creature and the true original cartoon, full with the quote and Bowie's original title, Metrobolist. In 2020, for its 50th anniversary, the album was reissued under its original title, Metrobolist, with a remixed version by Tony Visconti, except After All, which Visconti considered already perfect. And the cover art fully aligned with Weller's original concept. The gatefold includes previously unused dress photographs from the Macmillan shoot as well. Meanwhile, the title track gained wider popularity only later, via covers. In 1974, Bowie produced a version by Lulu, who turned it into a top 10 UK hit. She later admitted she had, quote, no idea what it was about. But Bowie guided her vocal tone, even encouraging her to smoke more to roughen her voice. And of course, most famously, Nirvana's 1993 acoustic performance on MTV Unplugged. This transformed the song for a new generation. When asked about the cover, Bowie said, quote, I was simply blown away when I found out that Kurt Cobain liked my work, and have always wanted to talk to him, end quote. The cover reframed the song in the context of Cobain's tortured persona. Audiences began to treat it as a Nirvana track more than a Bowie one. Bowie's review, kids would come up to him and say, hey, it's cool, you're doing a Nirvana song. His response, fuck you, you little tosser. That cover breathed new life into the Bowie original, introducing listeners to, or reintroducing them to, the album that had always hovered in his catalog as a subtle but radical pivot, occupying a strange liminal space in Bowie's trajectory. It wasn't yet glam, not yet Ziggy, it wasn't commercial in the way that Hunky Dory or Ziggy Stardust would be, but it planted seeds. It was packed with genre hybrids, androgyny, existential questioning, sonic risk, and of course, the visual statement embodied in that dress image. The ideas in that image in particular would echo forward throughout Bowie's career. He imagined the self as performance, identity as malleable, always blending spectacle with music. Tony Visconti later referred to The Man Who Sold the World as a blueprint. The Man Who Sold the World became the blueprint for the rest of David's career. Virtually everything he's done since, you can trace back to something on that album. I've since rarely played anything as ambitious or demanding as the music of that great batch of songs conceived by David Bowie. With Woody Woodmansey and Mick Ronson, two of the finest musicians I've had the pleasure of recording and playing with, we set out to create something new and classic. And indeed it is. Understated at first, struggling to find its identity across a variety of album covers, never really landing a key single, but still marking a pivotal shift in Bowie's career that launched him into a cascading array of personas we now all know and love.